If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Welcome to my channel where we cover the lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We cover the stories both big and small, the epic and the cute, the silly and the tragic. I hope you all enjoy the ride, and welcome to the Chronicler of Lore. Recently, a loud roar shook the area, and according to Urianger, that roar came from an unknown primal waking up. Since the Warrior of Light is kind of good at putting down primals, he would obviously be called on because the primal will wake up soon, and it'll cause a lot of problems once it does. Fortunately, someone's already started working on stopping the thing, and she wants your help. Since she's a member of the Scions, granted one that's always off doing her own thing, Minfilia told her that you'd help because volunteering you for stuff is what people tend to do. This person is waiting for you out in Wineport, so you head out there to meet her. Now this story takes place way back in A Realm Reborn, and the person you're meeting is Alice, from way back during that horrible era where she and Alphinaud dressed exactly the same. It's also only the second time you've seen her in game, and the first time you actually work with her, but she's of course already heard about you and how strong you are, and because of what she's trying to do, she knows she'll need that strength. Since the introductions are done, she gets on with telling you what's about to happen. When Dalamud fell, it not only caused the land's appearance to change, it did a lot of damage to the world's ether, causing it to clash at certain points underground, which made a lot of caves form. And one of those caves is located under Castrum Occidens and goes so deep that there's no telling what's down there. The Castrum operates as a research facility and a fortress, one that Gaius Van Belsar is using to study those caverns without anyone interfering, and if the Garleans are interested in something, it'd be stupid to ignore it. With each primal you took down, Alice noticed shifts in the ether that came from under the Castrum, and it needs to be checked on as soon as possible because the ether patterns are very similar to the ones that had appeared right before the world-changing calamity. It's been 5 years since Louisoix channeled the power of the 12 to seal Bahamut away, but what he tried to do failed, and both he and the primal vanished. Alice wants to find out what happened to her grandfather on that day, and what had caused the changes in the land after the fight. And she thinks those answers can be found in those caves, and she wants you to come with her. Normally she's fine with doing things on her own, but she knows what she can and can't do, and on her own she knows that she can't complete this mission. Since you helped her brother and the Scions, she figures that it'd be a good idea to see if you'd be willing to help her. You agree to help out, and the first thing she needs you to do is sneak into the Castrum and find a safe route into the caverns. When you find the path, she wants you to tell Jabraka, a soldier in Wineport who's also working with her. Since sneaking into an Imperial fortress is not new to the Warrior of Light, it's not exactly hard for him to find a way into the underground caverns. Jabraka is a servant of Alice's house, who became a member of the Maelstrom mainly to get information that she can use to help her mistress on her adventures. In other words, the woman's a spy, but none of that's your problem. If she gets caught and hanged, that's on her. All that matters is she goes and gets Alice, and the two of you head down into the tunnels. Saying the place is huge would be an understatement, and the giant corrupted ether crystals are all over the place. They appeared all over the world when the ether was altered by the shattered pieces of the artificial moon Dalamud crashing down. The moon itself was made by ancient Allagans to hold Bahamut, and years later the damage it did when it came crashing down can still be seen all around the world. And despite it having crashed 5 years ago, the defenses of Dalamud are still active, which is probably what the Garleans are after. That also means that you'll have to fight your way through them if you want to go any further, which is all in a day's work for the Warrior of Light. As the two of you head deeper into the cave, you see a massive wing that belonged to Bahamut. After Louisoix had tried to seal the primal away and failed, it had disappeared, and apparently now you know where it went. But the thing that's bothering Alice is the fact that Bahamut hasn't vanished. Primals lose their physical form when they're beaten, but if Bahamut hasn't vanished, did Louisoix actually beat him? To answer that question, there's more exploring that needs to be done, so the two of you keep moving while someone watches you, someone who vanishes before you can see him. After fighting your way past a lot of Allegan creations and riding an elevator down for what looks like miles, you and Alisaie find Bahamut's hand, which in comparison to the other members of the First Brood is huge. It's more proof that the Primal didn't lose his form after the calamity, which means the ether that would have been released on the Primal's death couldn't have been the cause of the changes that washed over the world. The caverns seem to go even deeper, so the two of you keep moving, only to get attacked by a dragon that's been fitted with some type of control collar. It's easy enough to deal with now, but it wasn't years ago when these fights were first made. With the dragon dead, Alisaie and the Warrior of Light come across a machine that Alisaie thinks she can figure out how to use. She's right, and after pouring some of her ether into it, it powers up and a wall opens, revealing Bahamut's head and heart both connected to a large machine, and the heart is pulsing, which means the dragon is very, very much alive. That also means that Louisoix died for nothing. There's too much that you don't know, so Alisaie figures that it'll be a good idea to leave for now, but not far from the dragon's head she sees two people, and one of them is her grandfather. She calls out to him, but he ignores her and leaves, and since there's nothing else to do, the two of you leave as well. Surprisingly enough, you pop out in northern Thanalan, quite a good distance away from where you went in, which is weird, but Alisaie is more concerned about her grandfather being alive and why he ignored her. This mission of hers gave her more questions to answer, so she figures it may be more comfortable to head back to the Waking Sands to figure things out, along with a little help from Urianger. Apparently around the time the two of you made it back to the surface, there was an etheric disturbance out in the Cartano Flats. There haven't been any primal sightings in that area, so it had to be Bahamut that the people were detecting. What they may have been sensing was the primal regenerating. For 5 years he's been slowly drawing in ether and using it to heal himself, which means if he's not dealt with, he could drain the land dry to restore himself, then pick up right where he left off by destroying the world. But it also looks like Louisoix is still around to help hold him off, but Alisaie won't know for sure until she talks to him. He went deeper into the cave, and since there are 2 more massive pieces of Dalamud that slammed into the ground, they could have made tunnels that will let you explore deeper into the area and track the man down. And Alisaie is not going to stop until she does, and of course you're going to help. Alisaie has still been working on the Bahamut and Louisoix problem, and Urianger has been talking to Rambros from the Sons of St. Coinach to see what he can figure out about Bahamut's prison. With Rambros being so knowledgeable about all things Allegan, he does know a little bit about it. Dalamud was made to gather sunlight and to channel it into the Crystal Tower. When the Allegans saw how powerful Bahamut's ether manipulating abilities were, they bound him to Dalamud to use as a power core. The devices that were linked to the half-dead Primal are called internment husks, and they bind Bahamut, keeping him from getting away, and they pour enough ether into him to keep him from losing his physical form. He's trapped, unable to die or escape from a prison that feeds on his own ether. The Primal had been trapped for centuries, but the prayer of their followers are the things that keep Primals in their physical form, which means the Allegan's machine must simulate that somehow. That means if all of the internment husks are turned off, then Bahamut should finally break down into ether. After a little bit of studying and searching, they figure out that there are 3 coils keeping Bahamut alive, and another piece of Dalamud with the same ether signature as the last one you explored was found in the 12's wood. There's a path inside from the North Shroud, and that should lead you to the second internment husk that needs to be shut down. Alisaie hopes the Warrior of Light will join her for another trip, and if you decide to tag along, you can tell her assistant Nael out near Falgord Float. She'll be heading there after she makes her own preparations, so she's hoping she'll see you there. Nael is one of Alisaie's assistants, who's worked her way up to lieutenant rank in the Twin Adders, so she could basically spy for Alisaie in the 12's wood. That position lets her do some things without being questioned, including doing a little investigating of the Dalamud fragment. From what she's seen, it's not all that different from the last one that you and Alisaie wandered through, complete with its own traps and guardians. Granted, she thinks you'll do better seeing it for yourself, and she has someone stationed there that can help you get a glimpse of the place, so you head off to meet him. Alisaie had told him to expect you, so he fills you in on what they found out. The Empire hadn't found this fragment, which meant no one had cleared a path to it, so all of their time has been spent doing that. They got a few glimpses inside, but all they know is that the master controls are at the bottom of the place behind a lot of Allegan defenses. So the only way to learn more is to explore the place whenever Alisaie decides to show up. Oddly enough, Alphino is the one who shows up first. Urianger had told him what the Warrior of Light and his sister were doing, and he came by to chat with you for a moment before you went into the Second Coil. He wanted to tell you that Alisay admired Louisoix even more than he did. Since the man died, she made it her personal mission to pick up where he left off and protect Eorzea. That's why she dove headfirst into the coil, but that's not what has Alphinaud worried. He doesn't want her mission to stop Bahamut to turn into a quest to save their dead grandfather. She needs a better reason to fight other than simply fulfilling someone else's dream, because he doesn't think that will be enough for her in the end. But he does think that traveling with you might help her find herself, since it did work wonders for him. But it won't help him if she finds out that he was monitoring her, so he wants you and Nael to keep it a secret that he was even there, since Alisay is kinda prone to violence. He leaves before she gets there, and once she arrives, the two of you dive into the second coil of Bahamut. Once the two of you get closer to the entrance, Alisay realizes that the corrupted ether warped the air in a way making it hard to see just how the area looks from far away. Up close, it's a much more dangerous place to try to walk through, but that's not going to slow her down. Not when there's a chance to save her grandfather. Saving her grandfather is at least second in her mind to fighting Bahamut, but it does seem like Alphinaud was right about where her focus lied. There's a lot of stuff blocking you from even getting into the moon fragment, but once the two of you get inside, you see someone in armor that everyone who was alive during the calamity would recognize. Nael Van Darnus, the White Raven, the man who caused the last calamity. But he's very dead, and when he hears Alisay say that name, he claims that's not who he is, and he's pretty insulted to be compared to that failure. He calls himself Nael Deus Darnus, a name given to him by Bahamut, the being that Nael claims is the one true god. This guy is clearly very tempered, and he warns you that if you keep defiling his god's domain, he will kill you. Then he drops off of a very high cliff and vanishes. The whole encounter was strange, but Alisay expected weird, so the two of you hop down onto a massive elevator, where instead of elevator music, you have elegant defenses to keep you entertained. The Warrior of Light deals with them as well as the very creepy snake lady waiting at the end of your ride. With that over and done with, it's deeper down you go. There are paths everywhere, and they are dark, which of course lead to more horrible Allagan monstrosities. They said that Allagans were really good at making all types of chimeras and such, and literally millions of the things were housed inside of Dalamud to keep the Allagans' enemies from releasing Bahamut. That was likely a deterrent for the Mericidians, who had summoned the Warring Triad in their battle with the Allagans, which led to the Void Scent being summoned with the power of the Crystal Tower and so on and so forth. While those defenses were meant for them, they work just as well as slowing you down too. But the Warrior of Light cuts a path through the defenses that are in his way, and he and Alisay make their way down to the heart of the coil, to a place that looks exactly like the fields of Cartno where Nael Van Darnus died, complete with a floating Dalamud overhead. Nael is there, and he claims that the place will be your grave since you kept destroying Bahamut's things. He starts to channel the power to do something probably nasty to you, but Alisay shoots first, knocking off his helmet and revealing that this person is actually a woman, which the real Nael definitely wasn't. Apparently when the man had died and his soul was on its way to the ethereal sea, Bahamut had snatched his ether and remade him into the woman you see before you. He ordered this remade Nael to destroy his enemies and gave her the power to do just that. It gives her a much more dragon-like form, and she turns all of that power on you. When you finally bring her down, the illusion that made the area look like the calamity fades, and the woman not only turns back into her normal form, but she's no longer tempered. She also claims to be the real Nael Van Darnus now, but she knows that the body she's in isn't her real one, and her mind's a little cloudy, but she refuses to be tempered again. Normally it's all but impossible to get untempered, which means Bahamut must have released Nael since she's near death and useless to him now. Nael thinks it's funny that she ended up being controlled by one of the creatures she had hoped to get rid of, but tempered or not, she knows with absolute certainty that she had initiated the Meteor Project on her own. Before she fades away, Alisay wants the woman to tell her what really happened to the world and her grandfather after the calamity. Nael thinks it's funny that Louisoix's grandkid had a hand in her death and release from the Primal's control, and she lets Alisay know that she'll get her answers if she keeps exploring the coils, but she probably won't like what she finds. Before she can say more, a spear made of light stabs her in the chest and puts an end to her for good. With her dead and out of the way, the two of you head off to finish your mission, and what you find is Bahamut has been regenerating a lot faster than you all had expected. That's kinda bad, but Alisay hopes that turning off this machine will slow down the process, at least enough to give you time to find the last one. She shuts it down and the two of you get ready to head back to the surface, only for Louisoix to show up and attack Alisay. He wants her to stop what she's doing because he won't let her keep interfering with Bahamut. She of course refuses to stop, so he goes to kill her, but the Warrior of Light steps in the way. The fact that he was really gonna kill her, that and the glowing red eyes, lets her know that Louisoix is just as tempered as Nael had been, and he decides to let you leave for now, but he promises that he will kill you both if you come back. With that, he leaves, and Alice is forced to admit that her grandfather is truly dead before the two of you leave and head back to the Waking Sands to let Urianger know what's happened and the plan for what to do next. After hearing about the fake Louisoix and Nael that you had to fight, Urianger thinks it may be for the best if Alice left this mission to the Warrior of Light, but of course there's no way she'd abandon the job. There is something that she's worried about. She doesn't know if Nael Van Darnus and Louisoix are the only two thralls that Bahamut had working for him. Nael had said something about Bahamut's beloved children that Alice had assumed was meant for the Guardians of Dalamud, but she could have been talking about other mortals that the Primal had enslaved. If that's the case, then you have to deal with them before you can shut down the last coil, because if even one of them lives, they'll just be able to summon Bahamut again, and she's willing to wipe them all out, even if that means having to put down her grandfather with her own hands. Alice has been having some problems with her mission with the Coils of Bahamut, and she decides to ask Urianger for a bit of his overly complicated sage advice. Bahamut's regenerating pretty fast, and there are still 2 internment husks that need to be turned off. She's found where they are, but she doesn't know how to get to them. Once you do manage to figure out how to get inside, you'll still have to deal with all of the Allegan tech, as well as whatever other guards Bahamut has enthralled. That includes Louisoix. But those problems only matter once you find a way inside. Urianger figures that the best way to do that is for Alice to take the Warrior of Light with her to the fragments of Dalamud, since him just being there tends to cause things to happen. While the two of you do that, Urianger will try to figure out a way inside using his own methods. Since she trusts the Warrior of Light, she agrees. There are 2 remaining fragments of Dalamud, one in eastern Thanalan and another near Mordona. Alice's left some of her people in each of the areas looking for a way inside. It's been a while, so they may have gotten lucky, so the two of you head to see Dex by the burning wall. The man's excited to meet the Warrior of Light, but unfortunately he hasn't managed to find a way into the fragment. He can see the entrance, but there's no way to get through all of the corrupted ether crystals. Since the Thanalan path is a bust, the two of you head off to Mordona to see if Sinis has had a little bit of better luck. That may not be the case, since apparently Dex has lost contact with his brother. Since there are a lot of monsters in the area, he could very well be dead, so the Warrior of Light and Alice race off to hopefully save him. The man was injured but not dead, but sadly the piece of Dalamud near him is impenetrable too. While Alice's assistants haven't found a way to make it into the place, a call from Urianger lets the two of you know that he's found one. He wants the two of you to meet him at the Cerulean processing plant in northern Thanalan so he can show you what he means. There are no fragments of Dalamud in the area, but there is a path inside, one that the two of you have used before every time you'd come out of the coils. An ethereal stream had taken the two of you out of the coils, and Urianger has figured out that the same stream that you rode out away from the first internment husk on is connected to each of the others through a giant machine. Him and his assistant figured that out, as well as how to travel to one of the areas that you hadn't explored yet. You'll be using a modified aetherite for your trip, but since it's untested, the trip could kill you both, or have you reappear with swapped body parts or a whole lot of other unpleasant things. That's a risk that Alice is willing to take, as is Urianger's assistant, who turns out to be Alphino. She's not happy that Urianger told her brother about her mission, and she promises to have words with him later once Bahamut is dealt with. He's cool with that, but since Louisoix is both of the twins' grandfather, he thought it only fair if Alphino knew what was going on too. As long as he doesn't interfere with her continuing her grandfather's mission of protecting Eorzea, she doesn't really care. But Alphino is still worried about the fact that she's fighting for someone else's goal and doesn't have a clue what she really wants for herself. Alice obviously gets angry at him for questioning her, something that she's only slightly grown out of over time. But what she doesn't understand is that Alphino isn't against her fight. He just wants her to be able to answer the question of why she's doing it. And while it may not seem all that important, it is, especially in a world filled with primals and tempering. The two of them would argue back and forth about it forever, which is what siblings tend to do, but Bahamut regenerating is a more serious problem, so the twins stop arguing, and Alice agrees to let Alphino tag along, as long as he follows orders, so the three of you make your way into the Final Coil of Bahamut. It's Alphino's first time seeing the insides of Dalamud, so naturally he's excited, but Alice is just happy that the little teleportation trick sent you all to a working internment husk. Since there's no telling how much more Bahamut has regenerated since the last time you had all been there, that means you need to shut it down quickly. There are plenty of containers holding Allagan creations, so it's likely that this trip won't be any easier than the last ones. The monsters are just as brutal as they always were, but as the Warrior of Light cuts a path through them, the group comes across some Allagan containers holding some very unexpected creatures. Dragons. A lot of them. They knew that the Allagans had figured out how to control dragons, but they hadn't thought they had locked away so many. They had so many other guardians that they wouldn't have really needed the dragons, but that's not what they have them for. It doesn't take long for Alice to realize that the reason the Allagans had so many dragons imprisoned was to use them to maintain Bahamut's physical form. That means all of those dragons have to die, or the threat of Bahamut won't end with his death. It's also likely that the dragon woke up and tried to destroy everything, because mortals seem to keep finding ways to do cruel things to the winged lizards that are the size of buildings. The fact that everyone keeps messing with them sounds dumber and dumber when you really pay attention to just how big the lead dragons are. Regardless of the fact that the Bahamut problem was brought on by mortals, he still needs to be put down, and since the machine keeping him locked up is likely the same one keeping the dragons alive, turning it off will solve both problems. So the three of you keep moving deeper into the coil. When you all reach Bahamut, you see that he is very close to being fully awake, so Alice goes to turn off the internment husk. As a surprise to no one, Louisoix appears to block your path. Alice has finally accepted the fact that he's not really her grandfather, but that's all talk because she's still affected by his words, especially when he questions her cause. He says that they only think of Bahamut as a villain because of what happened in the moments when he broke free, but they don't know the whole story. During the Third Astral Era, the Allagans had invaded Mericidia. Since they couldn't beat them, the Mericidians prayed to Bahamut, reviving him as a powerful god, but instead of defeating the Allagans, he got imprisoned by them. Louisoix had summoned the 12 to help with his people's problems in a very similar way that the Mericidians had summoned Bahamut. So his question is, why were the 12 celebrated while Bahamut is hated? It's hypocrisy to him, even though it probably has something to do with the fact that the 12 didn't try to kill the people, which kinda ruins his argument. But after what the Allagans have done, the only way that the dragons will ever know peace is if the mortals are wiped out entirely. And after everything they've done to the dragons, this mind-controlled Louisoix thinks that wiping out the mortals would be justice. That's the complete opposite of what the real Louisoix believed, since he believed that people were always worth saving. But now he thinks that it was foolish to believe that mortals even deserve to be saved at all. They can't stand together on anything since they start out by arguing about what direction they should face. The one thing that history shows is that if there's anything for mortals to argue about, they will find it. He even points out how the twins argue about everything and use their resources to guide people into doing what they want, which makes them no different than the Allagans. He had given the twins matching grimoire to bring them closer together, but even that had been a waste of effort. Alphinaud admits that Louisoix is right about them, but hearing his grandfather talk about how bad mortals are when the man was the one who cared the most about people just seems fake. He wants to know if Louisoix really believes what he's saying, or is it all because he's a thrall of Bahamut, or is it because of a third option? Has Louisoix himself become a primal? Alice hadn't even thought of that possibility, but it seems to be the truth. Somehow during the fight with Bahamut, Louisoix acquired the powers of a primal himself, but if you want to know how, you'll have to fight him. So he turns into his primal form, that of a phoenix, and attacks, which is why the Warrior of Light is there. He faces off against Louisoix, who is very much alive and not a creation of Bahamut at all, and manages to bring him down after quite a few slashes with his sword. Just like when you beat Nael, beating Louisoix broke him free from Bahamut's control. He is dying, but at least he can spend the last bit of time that he has as himself. The twins are happy to get a true reunion with their grandfather, although Alphinaud does feel a little bad for how he had talked to the man while he was tempered. Louisoix wasn't offended, and he's actually proud of the boy for figuring out what he'd become, which leads him to tell you all what really happened in the fight with Bahamut. When Bahamut had broken free from Dalamud during the Battle of Cartano, Louisoix had channeled the power of the 12 to help him make an ether prison for Bahamut. It didn't work. The primal was too strong, so he broke free. Louisoix didn't have much else that he could do other than use everything he had to do as much damage as he could and hope that the problem could be dealt with permanently by someone else in the future. But things didn't turn out like that. When the ether prison he had made was broken, the scattered ether filled the sky and combined with all of the prayers of everyone who was fighting below. Them praying for a savior, while Louisoix wished for a way to save the land from the calamity, combined with the ether and turned him into the primal phoenix, which is a symbol of rebirth. Since he was fully powered up, he hit Bahamut with everything he had and destroyed his body, which caused the ether to fall into the land to start the process of healing the world. That's why the game was called A Realm Reborn, and why this story was clearly supposed to be a part of the MSQ. Louisoix thought that everything was finished, so he let go of his new power so it could go back to the land too, but Bahamut wasn't dead, so as the power left Louisoix, Bahamut took him. His body still had enough of Phoenix's power to keep Bahamut alive and start his regeneration, and that's where his service to Bahamut began. That's why Eorzea didn't heal the way that it was supposed to. While there are so many areas with corrupted ether crystals, it all comes back to the conflict between Louisoix and Bahamut. And since the primal is still alive, he has been eating the land's ether. He ate everything that Louisoix had released and is sucking it all out of the world so that he can fully restore his giant primal form and finish what he had started. Normally he wouldn't have been able to survive with all of the damage he had taken, but since the elegant technology of Dalamud was helping to hold him in place, as long as any piece of him survived, he could live. The pieces of Dalamud have been slowly digging their way through the ground toward their prisoner, which is why there are so many pathways underground that no one knew about. And had Alisay not been looking, no one would have discovered this until Bahamut wiped them all out. Since he can't do it himself, Louisoix tells the Warrior of Light to finish off Bahamut, because if he recovers, he won't just kill all mortals. Even the dragons won't survive the calamity he'll cause. Of course, the Warrior of Light agrees, so Louisoix turns off the internment husk and opens a portal that will take you all to the last one. He's finally fading away, but as a last act after telling the twins that they need to find their own purpose in life and reason to fight, especially Alisay, he gives them the last bit of power that he has as a semi-primal and vanishes. With him gone, the three of you head to the final husk, but the moment Alisay tries to turn it off, Bahamut, in his incomplete form, still has enough power to attack. Lucky for the twins, they have just enough power between the two of them, since Louisoix buffed them up a bit, to hold off the attack while the Warrior of Light attacks Bahamut's core. The Primal has a smaller version of himself in there acting as a last line of defense, but because this wasn't done way back when the fight was supposed to happen, he gets wrecked. With Bahamut beaten, Alisay turns off the last machine that's keeping him alive, and the Primal that reshaped the world as well as the dragons that were keeping him there are all finally put to rest. Now that it's done, Alisay wants to know if Alphinaud had always known what their grandfather had become. He had a theory, but he wasn't positive. He had thought it was possible after hearing some of the stories people had told about what they'd seen at Cartano, and that was why he'd been worried that Alisay may have been being tempered by him, and he'd hoped he could help prevent it. It turns out that she was fine, so he doesn't have anything to worry about, but he does want to know if she plans on telling people what they found out about the Primal Phoenix. She won't, because she knows that if she does, people would try to summon him to fix the world, which would suck all of the ether out that's being used to heal it, which would do the exact opposite of what they want. She won't have her grandfather being brought back as an ether-draining primal who would destroy the world that he had died to protect, so the story will die with the three of you. With that settled, you all leave the coils for the last time, and even though she doesn't plan on telling the world about her grandfather, she will recommend that they seal off the fragments of Dalamud, just in case there's something there that can give people a hint of what happened. Well, Alphinaud will handle that part since he's better at politics, while Alisay heads off down her own path, and she promises that even though the world won't know how you saved them from Bahamut and freed Louisoix, she will never forget, and the next time you meet, she hopes to be an equal to the Warrior of Light. This leads us to her becoming the Alisay that we all know and love today, and it also concludes the story of the Binding Coils of Bahamut. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and if you really want to show your support, you can donate to the channel through the link in the description. Until next time guys, later.